everybody. My name is Alaina Tennant. I'm a playwright and student at Ohio University, and this summer I'm an intern here at MAPS. We put together 3 living history performances, which are like little one-person plays from the perspective of somebody who we got to do a lot of research on. Um, and this one at 2 o'clock is Mildred Hemmons Carter, who was a Tuskegee Airman female who worked at the Tuskegee Air Field.
They were all men, right? That's what you would think. I mean, they do say it that way. Airmen. I don't blame them. Air people doesn't have the same ring to it, and you'd certainly never hear it come out of my mouth. But it should be, technically, air people. You know, I actually lived in Tuskegee for a few years when I was just a baby. Of course, I don't remember much of it. We moved a couple times back then from Benson to Tuskegee, then off to North Carolina. In Carolina, there was a college called Bricks, an all-black college, all right, and prestigious, and Dad managed a business there for a little bit. Boy, oh boy, is my dad a smart man. Only person I ever knew to outsmart him is my mama. Before Bricks and before Tuskegee even, she was postmaster to our town. The whole town. That's right. And she'd always tell me with this big old grin on her face, she'd tell me she was a business woman. Yeah. See, you know how people sometimes say back in the day? Back in the day, or maybe back in my day, black women didn't have the same opportunities, so they didn't amount to anything. Well, you're here now, so your homework is, if you hear somebody tell you something stupid like that, you tell them about my mama. Back in the day. What a laugh. I don't care if we're talking about the 1800s or the teens or the 20s. Generation after generation we've been amounting. You'll see it. I mean, I could tell you stories from... But let me stay on track. Bricks. My father managed business at Bricks. Well, Bricks closed. The Great Depression got it like it got everything else. After that, we went to Mississippi. I graduated from high school. My mama actually worked at that high school. What did I tell you? But you wanted to hear about Tuskegee. Well, Dad was hired at the hospital, so we ended up right back there just in time for me to start studying for my business degree. Makes sense, right? Dad's a businessman, Mama's a businesswoman, I ought to be in business too. I studied. I worked in an office. I did all the things a normal girl should do. I was a teenager, so I made big messes and had to clean them up. I talked to boys. I rebelled when necessary. And I watched the planes. The war in Europe was well underway, and the military had this thing called the Civilian Pilot Training Program. They wanted as many civilians as possible to have their pilot's license, just in case, which they, of course, wouldn't admit, but all the European countries had done the same thing right before joining the war. That office I was working in, well, it was where all the applications for this civilian pilot training program ended up. We had young men applying by the dozens. And I was young, and I was interested. So I went ahead and filled out an application myself, wrote my name right there, neater than I'd ever written anything my entire life, Mildred Hemmons. I was rejected. I hadn't turned 18 yet, but that was an easy fix. I just waited a year and applied again, fully qualified and fully accepted. That was 1940. The same year, they built the Army Air Field. I wanted everything to do with it. I wanted to be around planes and around pilots and a part of these important causes. Black folks actually had a phrase we used at the start of the war, double victory. See, we listened in when America's politicians started talking about the horrific oppression and violence happening in Germany, how people were being persecuted, being banned from places, being branded and murdered in the streets just because they had a different heritage. I thought it was ironic, maybe, contradictory, but we saw it as the start of change, a call for equality. So double victory meant that if we could end racism abroad, we would be fighting to end it in America. That's why I think when they opened the Army Airfield in Tuskegee and said there was no way black folk were capable of flying, so many of us showed up to prove them wrong. Like I said, I wanted every part of it. I got myself a job as a clerk. Actually, I was the first civilian to be hired. I would spend my day bulldozing trees and taking college courses, then I'd turn around and do my pilot training. My teacher was Alfred Anderson, but of course we all called him Chief. Before Tuskegee, he taught at Howard, and nowadays folks have been calling him the father of black aviation. Isn't that something? We all loved him to death. He was a damn good teacher, too. Excuse my language. I shouldn't admit it, but I knew I was his favorite student. Some days he'd come up to me and he'd say, "Mildred, I feel like eating some Gulf shrimp for lunch." And I'd say, "You know what, me too." And we'd get in a plane and fly to Mobile and get some. Early 1941, I became the first woman to graduate from the Tuskegee Civilian Pilot Training Program. And in February, I became the first black woman in Alabama to ever earn her pilot's license. One day, I came back from flying, and I'm told there's someone who wants to see me. It was this quarterback fella called Herbert Carter. He worked at the grocery store, and we were in the college band together. I'd seen him a couple times. Poor Herbert was so flustered, but I thought it was cute. He was getting his pilot license, too. Although I think his plan was to learn to fly, do his time overseas, and avoid the draft. But something bit him, though, when he got in that plane, and soon enough, he was off for the Army Training Center, working to be a fighter pilot. Our first date, he took me to a campus dance. He made me laugh. He said I was such a tomboy, they ought to call me Mike. I said his middle name, Eugene, was better than his first name, and they ought to call him Gino. He said he wanted to hold my hand. I said I would like that very much. He said he would be off at Army training and we wouldn't be able to see much of each other. I said we could find a way. So we found a new date spot, 3,000 feet above Lake Martin. Gino would call me up on the weekends and he'd say, "Hey Mike, you gonna be flying this weekend?" And I'd say, "Of course." Then we'd pick a time and he'd hop in his AT-6 and I'd run down to Kennedy Field and pay $5 to rent a Piper Cub. We'd meet at the same spot every time, just over the bridge. It was like holding hands in the air. We'd wave at each other and blow kisses. The Cub didn't have a radio, but we didn't really need one. Gino and I, we always just connected without words. We both knew I was the better pilot. But the Army had better planes, so while I was putting along in my Piper Cub, Gino would fly in circles around me and chase my tail and pull up in my front and leave a trail of air wash. But like I said, I was the better pilot, so I thought it was fun. One day I came back from flying and I'm told there's someone who wants to see me. This time, though, it wasn't Gino, it was Eleanor Roosevelt. I was so excited, I don't hardly remember what I said to her, just that she was so tall and made me feel so short. And she asked about my pilot training experience. She took a flight with Chief, and she said without a shadow of a doubt that black people can indeed fly planes. It was bittersweet. After that, they started shipping the boys out. I wanted to go with them. I'd heard of this program, the WASPs, Women Air Service Pilots. I think that's what it's called. I mean, I could fly with Gino and the boys because I was a woman, but here they have this whole program just for women. I was shaking, I was so excited, and you bet I filled my name out better than I ever had anything before. Better even than my civilian pilot training application. Mildred Hemmons. And then I waited for my letter. Spent some much needed time with Gino. Apparently, he had spent all the money in his pocket on an engagement ring and wedding band. Boy, oh boy, was he flustered when he asked me to marry him. We had the wedding at the chapel on base, and I became a very proud Mildred Hemmons Carter. And I was cozied up with my new husband when I got rejected from the WASPs. The US government does not have plans at this time to include female Negro pilots in the WASPs. That's what they said. No plans, they said. Not the time to include Negroes, they said. Don't care what training you have, how good you are, how many first ladies and fathers of black aviation you know. We don't have plans to include you. I was mad. And I stayed mad when they sent Gino overseas. And I stayed mad when they said Tuskegee Airmen this, Tuskegee Airmen that. Airman doesn't mean pilot. It means every single person in the plane and on the ground, men and women. Keeping the planes up, it means me. It means me. But they didn't mean me. I know they didn't. and I went to the movie theater. We all went, practically all of Tuskegee. And I saw Gino up there working on his plane, and the boys up there working on their planes, smiling, laughing, going to war. And I started to sob. There isn't a single thing about war that's fair, not a single thing. Anyone can tell you that, but I can tell you too, and maybe I can tell you better. Not a single thing. I got lucky. My Gino made it out all right. The same as he's always been, smiles and laughter and holding my hand. He showed me photos in his diary. Turns out he named his plane Mike. He was flying with me all along. We made it out all right. Gino and those 355 other fighter pilots made it. They'll be in history forever. And I made it too, because I'm one of 15,000 some other men and women honored as original Tuskegee Airmen. Air people. No, it just doesn't have the same ring to it. Thank you very much. Hello.
Wow, this makes me want to go down to OU for everything these kids do this fall. Thank you so much. That was terrific. Give her another round of applause.